All right, so we're working on the test 2 review. We've already covered problems 1 through 10, and now we're going to look at factoring. And before we do that, I just want to go through the strategy that we discussed in class. As you do these problems, you should always begin by factoring out a GCF if possible. That's just a greatest common factor. So for example, here 12 and 8. The largest number you can divide both of those by is 4. That's our GCF. And then you got to figure out what times 4 gives you these two terms. And so that's 3x plus 2. Now you can check it by distributing here. 4 times 3x is the 12x, and 4 times 2 gives you the 8. The other thing you want to kind of keep an eye out for is notice inside the parentheses here, there are no common factors, and so that tells you you did indeed factor out the greatest common factor. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at, so once you've looked at the GCF, we look at the number of terms. So if there's 2 terms, assuming you've already factored out the GCF if there is one, these are the only types of problems we can factor. If you have a difference of squares, or a difference of cubes, or a sum of cubes. That's all we've got if you've got 2 terms. If we have 3 terms, we used the AC method. Here's a couple of examples right here. And then finally, if you have 4 terms, we factored by grouping. All right, so you want to keep this chart in mind, keep this process in mind as you factor the problems we're about to look at. All right, so one of the strategies that we used in class is, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And we'll just focus that in a little bit. All right, so the strategy we used in class is I had you do all the similar problems at the same time. In this video, I'm actually just going to go ahead and use what we were just looking at as a strategy. So first of all, number 11, the first thing we look for is a GCF, and notice we have one. It would be 4. Notice 2 works, but 4 is the largest, and 4 times 4x will give me the 16x, and 4 times a minus 1 gives me the minus 4, and that's going to be all we need. I think we're a little bit bright. I'm going to make us a little less bright. All right, so let's look at number 12. This also has 2 terms, but notice we cannot factor out a GCF. By the way, we can look back here, and with 2 terms, we know we can only factor differences of squares and differences of cubes, and this is neither of those, and so we're done here. You always want to factor until there's nothing more that you can do. Now here we have one of those differences of squares, and again, there is no GCF here. So hopefully you remember how to factor a difference of squares. The first number that goes here and here is the number you square to get x squared. That's just x. What number do you square to get 100? That's 10. 1 minus and 1 plus. And again, I would remind you that you can always multiply this out and you should get what you started with. That's the way to check yourself if you're not sure. All right, let's look at 13 and 14 next. In fact, these are both trinomials. Notice there is no GCF, and so here we're going to be using the AC method for both of these. So remember, A is the number or the coefficient in front of x squared, or the coefficient of x squared, and C is the constant. 1 times negative 72, that's my AC, that's just going to be negative 72. And my B term, that's going to be negative 1. Now you can be very systematic about how you pick your factors here, but when I think of 72, I normally think of 8 times 9, and you can see that 8 and 9 are going to work here. They need to have opposite signs, so one of them's negative. Since they add to a negative, make the bigger one negative. So notice 8 plus negative 9, that's going to be the combination that works. Now you could have tried all the other factors of 72, but this will be the only one that does work. And then we're going to split our b term. We get x squared. And then we're going to put in these two numbers with x. So plus 8x and a minus 9x. And we'll bring down the minus 72. Now notice we split our b term into two terms, but 8x minus 9x is negative 1x, and so we can do that. And now we're just going to factor by grouping now that we have four terms. We can factor out an x here. We get x times x plus 8. So one thing we learned is when you factor by grouping, you should get the same thing in the parentheses. If not, you've made a mistake, or it doesn't factor. So I'm expecting an x plus 8 here. I just got to figure out what times x plus 8 is going to give me these two terms. Well, to get the minus 9x, I need to multiply by a minus 9. So we'll put a minus 9 in there. So really this is subtraction. Negative 9 times x gives you the negative 9x, and negative 9 times 8 gives you the negative 72. So now we have two terms. Notice each of them have x plus 8 times something, and so x plus 8 is our common factor. And then we learned a little trick. We can cross those out, and whatever's left over is the other factor. That'll be x minus 9. Now the other way to do it is to actually cover the x minus 8's, and you can see the x minus 9. All right, and again, I'm sorry, didn't give you a whole lot of space here, but you could multiply this out and verify that it does equal what we started with. All right, so let's see how you did on 14. I would encourage you to try all these before you watch the video. So 2 times 15, that's my AC, that would be 30. And 13 is going to be my B term. So if you wrote out all the factors of 30, there's quite a few here. So 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. Now everything's positive here. I just need the pair that adds up to 13. That's the 3 and the 10. And so, as I've said in class, this is the key step. You've got to make sure, number one, that you have AC and your B term right here. But then you got to make sure these numbers do indeed multiply to 30 and add to 13, and they do. And so we're ready to plug them in. We'll split our B term now. We get 2x squared plus 3x plus 10x plus 15. Now, one of the things I've mentioned before is that these could be in the opposite order and you'll still get the same answer. It's just your work will look a little bit different. So the order of these two is not important. All right, so here I'm going to factor out an x times 2x plus 3. So when I factor this pair, I'm expecting a 2x plus 3. And it looks like we need a plus 5 there. 5 times 2x is the 10x, and 5 times 3 is 15. So again, we have two terms separated by a plus sign here. The greatest common factor is the 2x plus 3, and the other factor is x plus 5. All right, on number 15, we have four terms, which is basically a giveaway that we're going to want to factor by grouping. But you do want to double check that there is no greatest common factor, and there isn't. So let's factor the first two terms. We can factor out an x. It'll be x times a minus b. And so when we factor here, we're expecting to get an a minus b. And to get that 5a there, it looks like we need a positive 5 in the middle here. 5 times a is 5a, and a positive 5 times a minus b is a minus 5b. So there's our two terms. A minus b is our common factor. And again, if you cross those out, you can see you're left with x plus 5. All right, looks like we're on a roll here. 16 is the same as, very similar to what we did in 13. So we need two numbers that multiply to 24 here and add to negative 14. So again, I could be very systematic here. I'm going to go ahead and write down all the factors of 24. You know, and as you're doing that, you might need a calculator as you go. One of the things we learned is, as you look at these numbers, so we checked 4, and then, you know, 5 doesn't go into 24. The question is, when do you stop? I actually know that I can stop at 5. And the reason why is because 5 squared is 25, which is bigger than 24. As soon as this number squared is bigger than this number, then you will have tried everything that you need to try. You'll get all the bigger factors because they pair up with the smaller ones here. All right, so now we know that these numbers multiply to 24, a positive number, and add to a negative. Well, they have to both be positive or both be negative since they multiply to a positive. Since they add to a negative, they have to both be negative. So you can see the one that works is -2 plus -12. And so let's go ahead and split our b term. We get x squared minus 2x minus 12x plus 24. We can factor out an x. We get x times x minus 2. Again, I'm expecting to get the same thing inside the parentheses here. And to get these two terms, it looks like I'm going to need to multiply this x by -12. So we'll put a minus 12 in here. Notice -12 times x is -12x. And -12 times -2 does give you the 24. And so finally we have two terms with an x minus 2 as the common factor times x minus 12. All right, let's look at number 17. So on number 17, again, as we look at a problem and we're factoring it, the first thing we want to check is, do we have a greatest common factor? And in fact, we do. It would be 2. So we're just going to distribute now, or do distributive property in reverse. Since there's 2 terms here, there'll be 2 here. So 2 times something is 2x squared. I need an x squared there. And then 2 times a minus 9 would give you the minus 18. Now you got to be careful because you might be tempted to just move on to the next problem. But look inside the parentheses. Notice this can be factored further. This is a difference of squares. So let's factor this. We know that factors as x times x and 3 times 3, 1 minus and 1 plus. And in fact, we'll put a 2 out in front because we have a factor of 2 as well. Now think about what we've said before. Multiplication and factoring are opposites. So you could just FOIL this and you would get to here and then distribute the 2 and you get back to where you started. All right, on number 18, we definitely have some common factors. The greatest common factor, let's see, 4 is the largest divisor of 4 and 8. We've got 3 factors of x here and 2 here, so they both have at least 2. We just take the smaller of the 2 powers. This term has 1 factor of y and 2 factors of y in this term, so they each have at least 1. And so 4x squared y is our GCF. Now this times something gives me 4x cubed y. Looks like I just need an x. X squared times x will give me that x cubed. Minus, and I'm going to need a 2, because 4 times 2 will give me the 8. Notice we have x squared, but we need y squared, so we need another factor of y. And again, you can distribute here and you get back to where you started. Notice there are no common factors in here, so we know we're good. The other thing is this is a binomial, and there's nothing more that we can do. We don't have a difference of squares or cubes. We factored out the GCF, that's all we can do. All right, let's look at number 19. So on number 19, you could just jump right into the AC method, But you'll find your work's going to be a little bit easier if you start by factoring out a GCF, because there's a common factor of 3. Normally, if students don't factor the GCF out at the beginning, they forget to do it in the end. So it's just best to get it factored out right away. So we're going to have 3 terms here, 3 times 2x squared minus x minus 3. So what's inside here, we're going to need to factor using the AC method, or at least we're thinking we probably can. So here AC, 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, and our B term is negative 1. So the only factors that multiply to 6 are either 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. Now remember, these are opposites because we get a negative when we multiply. And so one will be positive, one will be negative. And since they add to a negative, we want to make the bigger numbers negative. The other thing you notice I do is I always put my smaller numbers on the left. So the one that works would be 2 plus negative 3. That gives me the negative 1. So just forget about the 3 for now. We've got 2x squared plus 2x minus 3x minus 3. And again, notice negative 1x does equal 2x minus 3x. This is equal. We can do this. Now we have 4 terms, so we'll factor by grouping. For the first 2 terms, we can factor out a 2x times x plus 1. So when we factor the second binomial, we're expecting that we can factor out an x plus 1. And notice I need a minus 3 times x to get the negative 3x. And negative 3 times 1 does give you negative 3. So we've got our 2 terms with a common factor of x plus 1. And our other factor is 2x minus 3. All right. Number 20, we have no greatest common factor. This is a sum of cubes. Notice you should know your cubes. 125 is 5 cubed. And of course, 8 is 2 cubed. And so this is a sum of cubes. And this has a nice pattern. We know it's going to factor as a binomial times a trinomial. And if we get these first 2 terms, we use those to get the rest, to get the trinomial. So we ask ourselves, what number cubed gives me 125x cubed? Well, I need a 5 and also an x. 5x times 5x times 5x gives you 125x cubed. 2 cubed is 8, and we keep the same signs. And so that's our first step. So we got what goes in here. Again, this number cubed is that, this number cubed is that, and I have the same signs. So then to get this number, we square whatever's here. 5x times 5x is 25x squared. To get this last number, we square the 2. It's always going to be a positive number. Here we have positive 4. So we squared this, we get that. We squared this, we get that. And then finally, this middle term is found by multiplying these 2 numbers. That would be 10x, and using the opposite sign. So we get 25x squared minus 10x plus 4. Now, I would have you notice that this is not like any of the other factoring that we do. You either remember the pattern or not. You could actually distribute the 5x times these 3 terms and the 2 times these 3 terms, and you could verify that this does work. Let's go on to number 21. So here there's certainly a greatest common factor, and you'll want to check, but 120 is actually divisible by 24. And also the smaller of the 2 powers of x would just be x to the first. So 24x times this first term is 24x squared. Looks like I just need an x. And then what times 24 is going to give you that 120? That would be 5. It's going to be minus 5 times 24x. That does give you the minus 120x. Notice inside there's no difference of squares or anything else that's got, with 2 terms, we don't have anything we can do with that. All right, on number 22, there's no common factors here, but you can certainly factor out a GCF. So let's see, our AC we can't factor out a GCF. Our AC here is negative 60. This has got a lot of factors, and our B term is 7. So 1 times 60, 2 times 30, you can just start, 3 divides into 60 20 times. You can always just divide 60 by 3. So 3 times 20. If you divide by 4, you find that 4 times 15 is 60. And 5 times 12, 60 is certainly divisible by 5, 12 times. 6 times 10, of course. And it turns out that's it. You could try 7 and you can try 8. Neither of those work. And notice 8 squared is bigger than 60, and so we know that we don't have to check anymore. So since we have a negative number here, these have opposite signs. Since they add to a positive, we want to make the positive numbers bigger and the smaller ones negative. And you can see the one that adds to 7 is negative 5 and 12. So that's the only one that will work. When you multiply, you get negative 60, and when you add, you get 7. So we're going to split our B term again, and it becomes minus 5x plus 12x minus 10. Again, the order of these two terms is not important if you use the opposite order there. So I'm going to factor out an x here. That's about all I can do. It'll be times 6x minus 5. So when I factor the second two terms, I'm expecting a 6x minus 5. And it looks like 2 times 6x will give me that 12x. So we'll put a plus 2 in here. And notice 2 times negative 5 also gives you the negative 10. So here's my two terms with a common factor of 6x minus 5. And again, when we cross that out, you can see your other factor is going to be x plus 2. All right, I'm going to stop the video here, and I'll do one last video for this review.